War doesn't take place in a vacuum. Battles are fought for control over the roads, infrastructure, facilities, and cities. The usual way of life collapses in these conditions. A man bearing a weapon has unlimited power over unarmed citizens. And unfortunately, in the end, civilians always suffer from war. Storming the city of Grozny in 1995, the Russian army officially lost around 1,500 soldiers, and another 500 people went missing. For 3 months of fighting with the use of tanks, artillery, and aircraft, the city was totally destroyed. At a minimum, nearly 27,000 civilians were random victims of the shelling by Russian military forces. This is episode 58 of the program History of the War. In 2014, the Russian Federation committed an act of armed aggression against Ukraine. The war has lasted for several years. Hot on the heels, we're following the course of this war and tracking the links between military operations, diplomacy, politics, and economics. We're trying to understand why exactly it happened. The results of war are always a matter of death and destruction. By the end of June 2015, 80% of residential buildings were destroyed in Shirokina. This prosperous resort was empty and abandoned. On June 30th, OSCE observers declared that not a single local resident was left in Shirokina. This is logical because it is not easy to survive the shelling, dealing with the lack of electricity and water supply, and walking through mined streets. So naturally, people left their homes. The village practically died and was basically turned into a shooting range. As it has already been said on many occasions, war is very costly, and on your own territory is 3 times more costly. Back in April 2015, the Ukrainian side proposed the demilitarization of Shirokina, the mutual withdrawal of troops from the front line with the formation of a 30-kilometer neutral zone was specified when the first Minsk agreements were signed, but the problem was that these agreements were not fulfilled. Time after time, pro-Kremlin forces violated the truce. This forced Ukraine to give an adequate response, which ultimately led to permanent disruptions of the Minsk peace process. The reasons for this behavior of the militants are simple and clear. Having the purpose to take control over the entire territory of Ukraine, the Kremlin tried by all means to move forward.
Харьков, Луганск, Донецк, Херсон, Николаев, Одесса.
At the same time, Ukraine tried to reduce the intensity of the fighting and in every possible way to reduce the number of casualties and the danger to civilians. On July 1st, the DPR militants declared that as a gesture of goodwill, they planned to withdraw their troops from Shirokina. However, there were very pragmatic reasons for such a peaceful gesture of the terrorists. During the latest battles, they suffered serious losses and did not have sufficient military forces to maintain their positions. Here, an important point should be noted. The widespread involvement of international observers in some way tied the hands of the Kremlin in terms of organizing the delivery of fresh replenishment to the militants. OSCE reports do not directly affect Russia's actions, but in the midterm, their results have proven that they have a powerful impact on the introduction of international sanctions against the aggressor country. Indeed, holding back the enemy in the fields, Ukraine launched an attack against Russia on the diplomatic front. By the summer of 2015, this hybrid strategy obviously had its effect. On July 2nd and 3rd, the militants continued shelling in the region of Shirokina, but eventually withdrew their forces. Although the individual skirmishes continued, the intensity of the battles in the village was seriously reduced. In the realities of a hybrid war, this can be called a victory. July 4th, near the town of Shestia, militants fired on the territory of the Luhansk power station and the coastal pumping station. As a result of this attack, 2 local residents received shrapnel wounds. On the same day, in the area of Checkpoint 29 on the Bakhmut highway, soldiers of a contingent of the Ukrainian army were blown up on landmines. 3 soldiers died, 5 were seriously injured, and later 2 of the injured soldiers died in the local hospital. On that day, the militants opened fire on the positions of the Ukrainian military forces 30 times. Despite the withdrawal of heavy artillery, the Ukrainian command took appropriate countermeasures. Artillery units were in a standby mode. If necessary, they were moved from the waiting areas and engaged in counter-battery combat. Naturally, one must understand that the constant aggressive attacks and attempts to penetrate the line of defense have become an ordinary tactic and the course of the day in a battle situation. On both sides of the front, sabotage and reconnaissance groups were constantly operating. On July 7th, near the village of Lopaskine, which is close to the town of Shastia, saboteurs fired small arms and grenade launchers on a Ukrainian military truck. An exchange of fire started, in which a fighter of the 8th Special Purpose Regiment was killed. 3 more soldiers were injured. On the same day, on the Svitlodar Arc, near the village of Luhanske, a soldier of the 30th Brigade was killed on the explosion of a landmine. On the same day, July 7th, the villages of Boykivske and Svobodne, located in the uncontrolled territory, came under mortar fire. As a result, 2 local residents were killed, several residential buildings were destroyed, and infrastructure facilities were damaged. Russian journalists who promptly arrived at the scene immediately accused the Ukrainian army of shelling. But in reality, everything was more complicated. The shelling was actually a terrorist act with the aim of provocation. While firing on residential buildings, Russian terrorists deliberately took a position in the west of the village, and in this way tried to accuse Ukraine of breaking the truce. However, in these provocations, the militants were negligent. OSCE observers who examined the place of the shelling recorded the strikes of mortar shells with a caliber of 120 mm and confirmed that the shelling was from the western side of the Ukrainian positions. However, the 120 mm mortar has a maximum range of 7 kilometers, and the shortest distance to the Ukrainian positions in this area was more than 15 kilometers. It is important to understand that such barbaric provocations occurred quite often. On July 8th, Stanitsa Luhanska was shelled during the night. The fire of mortars and automatic grenade launchers damaged power lines and gas pipelines. As a result of the shelling of the private sector, a local resident was injured by shrapnel. On the same day, the militants were active in the area of Krymske village. Not limited to shelling, the terrorists tried to storm the Ukrainian positions. Though the shooting lasted for about an hour and 1 soldier was wounded, Ukrainian soldiers managed to hold their position. On July 8th, along the entire line of demarcation, the ceasefire regime was violated 20 times, but the Ukrainian troops suffered no casualties. However, the next day, in the area of the village of Malinove, a soldier of the 128th Brigade was killed, and another was wounded near Stanitsa Luhanska in a battle with enemy saboteurs. A local resident, who was slightly injured, was an accidental victim of the shootout. In total, on July 9th, Ukraine lost 5 soldiers of various regiments. It should be understood that shelling and fire exchanges with the enemy took place practically every day. Thanks to a developed system of fortifications and active defense, the number of casualties was maintained at a relatively low level. However, despite all the precautions, there is no war without the dead. On July 10th, 5 soldiers of the 14th Brigade were wounded in the area of Pavlopol as a result of artillery shelling, and another soldier was killed. Despite the fall of the defense of the Donetsk airport in January 2015, the fighting in the area continued in the summer. In an effort to push the Ukrainian troops back from their capital, the militants constantly attacked the Ukrainian positions. On July 11th, while performing their assigned tasks near the Donetsk airport, 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. It is important to note here that the opponent suffered comparable losses. This was clearly obvious by the number of cemeteries both on the territory controlled by the militants and in Russia itself. Moreover, if on the territory of the Federation, soldiers of the hybrid army were often buried secretly and without honor, on the territory of the fictional republics, the level of secrecy was much lower. Many soldiers of fortune from the central part of Russia were buried near Donetsk or Snizhne, and this is no secret to anyone. On July 11th, in the area of Horlivka, as a result of a bomb explosion, a fighter of the 34th Battalion was killed. The next day, under similar circumstances, head of intelligence of the administration of the missile forces and artillery of the OC West, Colonel Yuri Tsisarchuk, died in the area of Novotoshkevsk. Another soldier was injured. Positional warfare with a stable front line and limited use of heavy weapons dictates its own rules. The standoff gradually turned into sabotage and the rivalry between snipers and sappers. Mines do not ask for a password, they do not distinguish a soldier from a civilian, and they do not look at the color of the flag. In fulfilling their mission, most explosive devices can wait patiently for their victims for many years to come in the future. On July 14th, the Ukrainian army suffered major losses. On this day, 10 military servicemen died in the new reality of limited positional confrontation, and that is quite a significant number. Mine war was waged once again near Stanitsa Luhanska. In the area between the villages of Size and Bolotne, performing a combat mission, 2 officers and 3 soldiers of the 128th Brigade were blown up on an unknown explosive device. It is also important to note that the dead were experienced sappers and veterans of the battle for Debaltseve. The commander of the group, Serhiy Melimuka, was known for commanding the organization of engineering barriers at the approaches to the Oleksiy supporting point near Sanjarivka. Due to the effectiveness of the mines installed in the vicinity of the stronghold during the attack on January 21, 2015, the militants suffered heavy losses. In that battle, the militants could not break the Ukrainian defense. The plan to surround the Debaltseve ledge and let the Russian terrorist forces to go out to the operational area with a breakthrough in the direction of Kharkiv failed. The work of the people of Major Melimuka turned out to be a crucial element of the line of defense without exaggeration. The first half of the summer of 2015 cost Ukraine 124 lives of its defenders. In total, from the beginning of the Russian invasion, by this point, 2,687 soldiers died. Defending peace and the territorial integrity of the country, more than 5,000 soldiers were wounded, injured, and completely shell-shocked. Every day, blood was shed on the front line. But just a few kilometers behind the backs of the soldiers, everything was different. People of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Lysychansk, and Mariupol lived a normal life. People spoke in a language that was comfortable for them, went to work, and looked towards the future with hope. Destroying the Russian myths about the bloodthirsty supporters of Stepan Bandera and genocide, a man with a weapon literally took a hit on himself, as a genuine defender should do.